Welcome back to News Talk. 17 before the hour now. The Virginia General Assembly wraps up its work for the year on Saturday. It's been an interesting session, to say the least. Joining us now with some insight and analysis, reporter Michael Pope. He covers Virginia politics for our friends at WAMU 88.5. Great to have you back. It's a really interesting time in Richmond, so great to be able to talk with you. Let's begin, I think, in the obvious place of a vacancy on the Virginia Supreme Court that has the governor, Terry McAuliffe, and the Republicans who control the state assembly really butting heads, with a name that Northern Virginians know well suddenly entering the mix as this back and forth continues.
Ken Cuccinelli, former Attorney General, someone who had an unsuccessful bid in 2013 to run as governor, came very close, it's worth remembering, to beating McAuliffe. That was a very close election. So let's back up here a little bit and talk about the Supreme Court vacancy, which has dominated the sort of behind-the-scenes discussion here. So last year, there was a Virginia Supreme Court justice that withdrew after the General Assembly convened. So this really angered Republicans because they felt like this particular justice waited until the lawmakers had left town, then stepped down, giving the governor the ability to do a recess appointment, which he did, appointing Fairfax County Judge Jane Roush, very much respected in Northern Virginia on both sides of the aisle. She actually has a number of Republican supporters. So she got the interim appointment. Republicans felt like they were not consulted, they were out of the loop. You know, it is the General Assembly who appoints the judges, not the governor.
Even though at least one, and correct me if I'm wrong, one Republican from Northern Virginia was with the governor when he announced the appointment, so it's not like...
That would be Dave Alba, right,
so
exactly.
It's not like
who represents Fairfax County, so there's a Fairfax County connection there.
So it's not like he sprung it on them in the sense where that people listening to us now would say, oh, no consultation, no advance notice. He sprung them on it. There was at least some, the issue being how much communication and consultation was there before the Roush nomination. But continue. It's a very interesting story.
Well, you know, what you're talking about is that was when the governor made the recess appointment. So the Republicans wanted to be consulted in advance of the selection. So in any event, you know, the governor's opinion on all this is patent place stuff. Like, why are they doing this? But in any event, so the governor appoints Jane Roush to the Supreme Court. Republicans are angry because they had not been consulted. So they come up with their own candidate, Rossi Alston, the appeals court judge. And so for most of what's been going on this session is the Republicans want Rossi Alston, the Democrats want Jane Roush. And because the Senate is so closely tied, the Democrats only need to peel off literally one senator to make the whole thing crash and fall apart, which is exactly what they did. Getting a freshman senator, Glenn Sturtevant, said, well, I don't like what you guys are doing to Jane. This is a freshman senator. I don't like what you guys are doing to Jane Roush, so I'm going to vote with the Democrats. So they were at the stalemate, and the stalemate, by the way, would have given the governor the ability to appoint Jane Roush again as a recess appointment when the lawmakers left town. So that's where we were up until yesterday, when all of a sudden former Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli appears on the scene, and the Senate Courts of Justice Committee nominated him to the Supreme Court. So the Senate is going to take this up today. And keep in mind, the Democrats only need to peel one senator away. So right now, it looks like they've got the votes to approve Ken Cuccinelli to the Virginia State Supreme Court. The House is very likely to approve this. So we might end the session with Justice Ken Cuccinelli.
Amazing, and that'll be something to track. And I know you'll be tracking it as developments merit. This session has seen Governor McAuliffe wheeling and dealing in a way that he says is generating real results on very important issues, but has his base and some Virginia Democrats saying, you know, hold on here. You're really engaging with the other side. It's what voters say they want. Sometimes, though, when they get it, not always 100% happy with the results. This has been a wheeling. This has been Terry McAuliffe, wheeler dealer in action.
Absolutely. You know, this session has really given McAuliffe a legacy that he did not previously have. If you think about before the session, there was this conflict on Medicaid, just totally intractable. There was this conflict on the judges, totally intractable. And so up until this session, McAuliffe had the image of being the partisan fighter who hasn't really gotten a lot accomplished. That changed this year on two notable things, guns and transportation. So on the gun deal, you know, every year in Richmond, it's sort of the same thing. The same people issue the same bills, the same people kill them, and they leave town and nothing happens. This year, totally different, mainly because Attorney General Mark Herring did this surprise move late last year on reciprocity. So this is kind of a complicated issue, but basically in 25 states that don't have concealed carry permit rules as strict as Virginia, those concealed carry permits would no longer have been accepted in Virginia. This really angered Republicans, as you might imagine, but the Attorney General totally had authority to do this. And so the governor went into this General Assembly session with leverage that he had never previously had, thanks to the Attorney General. And he used that leverage to cut a deal with Republicans on gun safety, two issues that Democrats had wanted to do for a very long time, involving voluntary background checks at gun shows and not allowing people who have been convicted of domestic violence to have guns. So he was able to use this thing that the Attorney General had done to give him leverage. And there's some palace intrigue here also.
Even though McAuliffe and Herring are of the same party, there was enough separation, there was enough daylight in terms of the merits, but also McAuliffe sensing where a deal might be possible that really you can see where Herring's action created a changed landscape.
Absolutely.
Going into the Assembly.
Yeah. So Herring's action absolutely created a changed landscape, and the governor saw this opportunity and he went for it. By the way, there's some palace intrigue here on whether the governor sort of undercut the Attorney General. And that'll sort of play out, I think, as we move into other campaign cycles. But the other main sort of wheeling and dealing I want to make sure I got to is transportation. So widening 66 has been something people have talked about a long, long time. I remember going back to when Kane was campaigning for governor. He campaigned on widening 66 inside the Beltway. That didn't happen. So heading into this session, there was this gridlock, not a partisan gridlock, but what you often see in Virginia is there's regional differences that are just as strong as partisan differences. And the Northern Virginia people sort of have a different view of the rest of Virginia. And even then, sort of inside the Beltway has different views outside the Beltway. So going into this session, there was this debate about widening versus tolling. Do you toll first and widen later, or do you widen first and toll later? So there was this dispute, and so the governor cut a deal that basically did widening and tolling at the same time. Now, on both of these issues, the guns and the transportation, there are the base supporters of McAuliffe who feel like he undercut their interests by giving away this issue of reciprocity that Herring had set up.
Arlington has always had strong feelings and the sense of a historic deal when it comes to 66 inside the Beltway.
Yeah, Arlington was very upset about this because they weren't really sure that widening was necessary. They wanted a study to happen and then perhaps other transit solutions other than widening. What you hear in Arlington is if you widen the road, cars will fill it. So there might be other ways to do this. But so from their perspective, McAuliffe sort of undercut that.
Your reporting on the issue of predatory lending may have gotten the ball rolling in terms of the Assembly's consideration of what this sort of lending product, if you will, does to people who are on thin ice financially. What's happening in Richmond now on this issue?
Well, there is some action on this. Not a law necessarily, but the lawmakers considered a bunch of laws and they decided to instead ask the regulators to crack down on this industry. So what's going on here is what they call dual licensing. If you walk into a Title Max, you could get a car title loan, but you could also walk out with an other kind of loan, what they call a consumer finance loan. And that's because the Title Max has dual licensing. They've got a car title license. They also have a consumer finance license. And so the lawmakers were really concerned that this was bait and switch. And so they're asking regulators to disallow, to pull back all these dual licensing authorities. But the interesting thing there is when they asked the regulators to do this, it actually went beyond what the legislation had considered because they roped payday lenders into this and open-ended credit lenders. So what happened is what's right now being considered by the regulator is actually much broader than what had been considered by the lawmakers. And so what we're likely, so the regulators aren't really sure they have the authority to do this, and so their lawyers are looking at this, but what could come out of this is a reform that's even broader than had been conceived under the legislation.
And we have about 30 seconds left. As your reporting indicated, many people who need money to bridge a financial situation find themselves going from the skillet into the flame if they fall behind. You need your car to get to work. That's the peril in this, right?
And we're seeing the number of repossessions of cars is doubling over the last few years. The number of people missing monthly payments has tripled. So this is an industry that is growing exponentially.
Michael Pope covers Virginia politics for WAMU 88.5, covering the Virginia General Assembly session that wraps up on Saturday. Good to have you here as always.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for your time. We're back with a program note after this.